Hey everyone, Chris here with another filler video, and today's is a bit interesting. What you're looking at right now is Retro City Rampage 486, a very recent DOS port of the original Retro City Rampage released in 2012. To be blunt, this thing's existence is almost completely pointless, but it's also completely understandable once you realize why it even exists in the first place. To start off, let's quickly discuss the original Retro City Rampage. It's essentially a game which plays a lot like the original Grand Theft Auto games, but the entire thing is basically one massive parody of the video gaming and pop culture from the 80s and 90s. Pretty much every little thing in this game is a reference to something. Heck, even the title itself, Retro City Rampage, is a spoof of the NES game title River City Ransom. Like the GTA games, there's a main story and side quests, plus a number of mini-games and other activities to pad things out, such as restyling your character, finding invisible walls, hunting down loot boxes and cheat codes, going to the casino. There's just all kinds of stuff scattered around the game world. Though this game's actually somewhat polarizing to a degree as well. Because of the massive number of references and the somewhat simple gameplay, most people either love this thing profusely or hate it with a passion, and there's not much of a middle ground. However, love it or hate it, it's easy to play, the graphics are extremely well done, and the music is superb, all invoking a sort of NES style each step of the way. Now, this is related to the fact that the game's author, Brian Provinciano, whose last name I'm sure I'm mispronouncing, originally tried to make Retro City Rampage as a homebrew NES title over a decade ago under the development name Grand Theft Tendo. However, the last thing people were likely expecting was a port to DOS. I know, I run a show called Ancient DOS Games, but let's be honest here, DOS hasn't been relevant as a development platform in almost 2 decades. I mean, who in the world is this thing targeted to? What is the point of its existence? Why is it missing all the audio fidelity of the original game? And just to top it all off, why is it missing features in general? The funny thing is, I can actually answer all of these questions myself, because as a game designer, I understand a lot of what Brian's thinking in terms of making this thing. Well, let's start with the first point as to who this thing is even targeted to. As a game you would sit down and play all the way through, it's not targeted to anyone. At all. And seriously, since this is essentially a carbon copy port with missing features that is included for free with the regular version of the game, there is absolutely no reason whatsoever to play this version and not the regular version. However, as a programming curiosity and as a collectible, it's targeted straight at fans of the original game who will want to eat up variations of the title. To that end, Retro City Rampage 486 is actually being sold as a fully boxed game, limited to a run of 1,000 units, currently in pre-orders. No idea if the full 1,000 units has been hit yet, but I'll have links in the video description and on my website for those who are curious. Well, this is a fully functional DOS game put on a 3.5-inch floppy disk, capable of running on old 486 hardware and even 386 hardware if you don't mind a terrible frame rate. This boxed variant is more so for sake of collecting, which is partly why the run is being capped at 1,000, and which is why there isn't too much of a concern about the game being feature incomplete. So let's tackle the next question as to what the point of this thing's existence even is, beyond selling limited edition boxed copies. Retro City Rampage was already a fun game, a lesser DOS version really didn't need to exist. But this rolls us back around to the whole game design thing. As both a designer and a programmer, you always want to be challenged so that you improve and put out better and better stuff. But sometimes the challenge is more so about actually accomplishing something as opposed to trying to make money. As already stated, Retro City Rampage started life as an NES homebrew title. The only reason anyone gets into homebrew is for the challenge, because quite frankly, there's virtually no money in it. Not that people don't sell reproduction carts and homebrew console games and such, but the cost to make such things and the limited demand for them greatly hinders the profitability of such ventures. Which you can see for yourself when you realize many of those homebrew projects are given away for free online as the ROMs. Not all of them, but quite a lot of them. These things are done because of the challenge, not because of financial gain. With that in mind, I can tell you right now, going from modern game development to DOS development is definitely a trip and a half. Developing a game in DOS is usually easier than developing a game in Windows, until you start trying to push the limits. If Retro City Rampage 486 was developed to be run primarily on Pentium systems with 16 megs of RAM or more, it would have been a super easy port to make. Retro City Rampage 486 is designed to run on very underpowered hardware, yet still be playable and accomplish all of this with only 4 megabytes of RAM, the rough minimum you could expect with an old 486 system. So one of the major hurdles with making a DOS game using more than 640 kilobytes of conventional memory is memory allocation. Nowadays, operating systems manage memory extremely well, so programmers don't have to worry about where they put stuff in memory. All a programmer has to do is be like, I want to put this in memory, and the operating system is like, no problem. In DOS though, when you want to put stuff in memory, you have to worry about things like if you're making a near or far pointer, which determines where your stuff physically gets positioned within memory, whether the value is volatile or not. And if you remove it, you have to worry about the physical gap you've left behind, which may or may not be possible to easily load up with new stuff, potentially leading to memory fragmentation, which can lead to memory failures even when there's enough memory free to do what you want to do, because there's no longer a free enough contiguous segment to be useful. Essentially, developing for DOS when you're someone who's never really needed to do that is a challenge in its own right. So that's why this thing even exists at all, as a way for the game's author to challenge himself on a programming level. This leads into the next thing I brought up too, which is why this game only has PC speaker audio support when the full game was loaded with sound effects and music. Now this answer is actually twofold. The first part of it is that, again, it was a challenge for the author to try and code for the PC speaker, having never done so before. Not to mention trying to make it sound decent in the process. And yeah, the game's not emulating the PC speaker, it's using the PC speaker. So if you run this thing on actual hardware, all the sound's going to come out of the PC speaker and not your sound card. But the other thing too is memory. Unlike a digitized sound effect, it takes very little memory to produce a PC speaker effect. Heck, with the right optimizations in the sound engine, you could store entire PC speakers' sound effects in just a handful of bytes. An uncompressed, digitized stereo sound effect which lasts for just 1 second is at the maximum level of quality you could attain on an old Sound Blaster 16 card, requires just over 172 kilobytes of memory. I know that's a bit of an extreme example because no one would ever use uncompressed high-quality sound in a DOS game. This is not enough memory to do it. But remember too that one of the challenges the author faced was managing to get the game to fit on a single floppy disk. Sure, the minimum amount of RAM you could expect on a 486 computer would be about 4 megabytes, but a 3.5-inch floppy disk only stores 1.44 megabytes of data. Given the fact that the author had to store all kinds of graphics and code as well, compression can only get you so far. In fact, upon closer inspection, you'll notice that a lot of the more intricate graphics are gone too, and most of what's left are just the generic tiles that are used multiple times. This also explains why the minigames are gone as well, since there simply wasn't enough memory to add them in. And that's ultimately why so many features are missing. There just isn't enough space on a floppy disk to store everything that was needed, no matter how much compression you employ. Heck, I even decided to play through this entire version of the game just to see if maybe, just maybe, the final minigame was present, since it's kind of a big deal in regards to the story, but nope, not present. Goes right from the starting cinematic to the ending cinematic. I can't say I'm surprised, but I am somewhat disappointed because I remember when I got to that point in the original game and was somewhat stunned as to just how awesome it was and how true to the parody it felt. Not to mention the rocking music and intense action of it all, but it's not here in this version. But then, show of hands, how many of you who've played through the original game are honestly thinking of playing through this version? Well, spoiler alert, there's nothing here that you haven't seen in the original game, and all kinds of stuff is missing. And I guess you could go through this thing just for sake of hearing everything done in the PC speaker, but somehow, I don't think that's really worth it. In short, Retro City Rampage 486 is a lesser port of the original Retro City Rampage. Still plays fine, and given the limitations it's pushing, it's extremely impressive from a technical standpoint. But really, the only kick you can get out of this thing is being able to load it up on an old computer and be like, yeah, I got a newfangled game working on my old Packard Bell system. Or something like that. If you're interested in the game, but not the technical side of things, then you have absolutely no reason to play this version of the game and should just stick with the regular version. But, since you can't get this version of the game without getting the regular version too, and yes, that includes the boxed copy, there's really no point in complaining. The author wanted to have fun making a DOS port, so he did. Was it a pointless endeavor? Even with 1,000 sales of boxed copies? Probably. Was it a fun endeavor, though? I may not be Brian, but I know how game programmers think. I am one. And I can say without a doubt, yes, this thing was probably really fun to make. Anywho, if you want to try this thing out in DOSBox, all you have to do is set cycles to max and you're good to go. Yeah, I figured I'd throw that in for good measure. Joystick support also works without any extra configuration too, which is always nice. And that's all for today's filler. Next episode of Ancient DOS Games, episode 171, will be on Saturday, September 5th. Yeah, kind of a long ways away, but there should be a couple more video blog entries to pass the time, which, yeah, I didn't get to one this week. I have an explanation as to why up on Patreon for those who are curious. As for the next game I'll be covering, I'm going to take advantage of the extra time so I can bring you a fairly epic game. At least as far as 1981 was concerned. Yeah, that old. Well, okay, I'm actually covering the remake done in 1986 because the 1981 version wasn't ever released for DOS. If you think you know which game that could be, then just send your guess to adg@pixelships.com and stay tuned as there's plenty more games to get to.